to glaze a mug, and we're going to start with a bisqued mug. I want you to remove the dust. Take a bucket of water. The tools that you're going to need are a bucket of water, your rag, a glaze tongs, a brush, maybe a pin tool, maybe another brush. Wring the water out of your sponge as much as possible because you don't want to get your pot very wet when you're wiping the dust off. What you're wiping off is any dust that might have been landing on there while it was sitting on the shelf, or maybe if you sanded the piece, it might have a little dust on it. So that'll keep the glaze from adhering properly, so you want to make sure to get all of that off with as dry of a sponge as possible, because you want this to stay porous and thirsty so that when you dip it into the glaze will stick to the outside. So the first thing we're going to do is, if you have any little rough spots on there, you might take a little piece of silicon carbide and grind those off. Just do a little visual inspection, maybe an inspection with your fingers. If where you wrote your name on the bottom it's rough, you can do that as well. And then take that dust off from that process. Now, I don't want to get glaze on the bottom of the piece, so I'm going to use a brush to apply a layer of wax resist to the bottom. We use a special brush to use the wax resist because it does tend to get up into the roots of the bristles and kind of eat up the brush itself. So I don't like to use my good glaze brush to do this. So I'm going to just paint it on the bottom and a little bit up the sides. Okay? Doesn't have to be thick. In fact, apply your wax thin because you need that to dry before you can actually glaze the pot. The next thing I'm going to do is make my glaze ready for dipping. This is one of our studio glazes called Variegated Blue, and when I first open it, I noticed there's sort of a layer of water on the top. So you're going to want to stir that, and there's a toilet brush in there which makes stirring it nice and easy. Now, besides stirring around and around, you really have to also churn the glaze from the bottom to the top. So scrape along the bottom and churn it from the bottom to the top. You can look at the edge of the brush and see if there's any sort of goopiness there. If there is, you need to keep stirring until that goes away. Make sure that you get around the bottom edge and across the center of the bucket. If the glaze isn't stirred right, it is not going to look like you think it's going to look. So how it looks on the test tile is one thing. If it's not stirred up, it won't look anything like this. It'll probably just look kind of brown and very dry, and you'll be very disappointed. So stirring is incredibly important process before you glaze. So now that I've gotten stirred, I'm going to shake out my brush a little bit and just rest it on the lid. If it gets on your hands, you can wipe them off in your bucket. And I want to test the thickness of the glaze. So using dry fingers, stick them in, swirl them around, and flick. Don't forget to flick. You want it to be thick enough to cover your fingernails, but thin enough to kind of pool in the cuticles of your fingers. So if it looks right, you're ready to glaze. If it's not right, ask myself or one of the studio techs to put some water in it and make it correct for you. So my wax is now dry. It only takes a minute. I'm going to use the tongs to dip the cup in. These tongs will make sure that there's not too many finger marks or anything on the outside. It enables you to hold it well. So when you go into the glaze, you want to put it below the surface and then hold it in there for like 3 or 4 seconds. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000, and then bring it out and hold it upside down. You'll notice where the wax is that the glaze starts to kind of curdle on the surface, and you can take a sponge and do a preliminary wipe. Now I'll go in, and do a final cleaning before it's fired. but right now that's a preliminary wipe, and you can see how easy that was to clean off the bottom. If you forget to put wax on the bottom, it's not a huge big deal. It just means that you're gonna have to scrub the glaze off a little harder. The glaze has no purpose during the firing process. It's just a glaze aid. So if you forget to put wax on, you glaze it and then you scrub the glaze off. Don't go putting wax on then afterwards, because you don't need the wax after that. The only purpose of the wax is to make your life a little bit easier while you're glazing the pot. You'll notice that I've held it upside down. There's a little drip at the bottom. Sometimes I'll use a brush to catch that little drip, or you can just tap it with your sponge. But I like to hold the pot upside down until it dries so that the drips don't turn around and start dripping down the pot. Now you can leave it off to the side. Gently open the tongs and pull them out without scraping them on the side. These go right into the water to be rinsed off, and you need to do a little bit of sponging on the tips of them, because there's nothing worse than getting a pair of tongs that have a little